Welcome to the September edition of Casita Coalition's 2023 webinar series on ADUs and middle housing. From San Luis Obispo, I'm Ann Wyatt, Casita Coalition board member and executive director of Smart Share Housing Solutions. Thanks for joining us today. Casita Coalition is a cross-sector, statewide nonprofit. We believe that providing housing choice and opportunity for people of all ages and stages of life in every community is an essential foundation for California, where all can thrive. Since 2017, more than 83,000 ADUs have been permitted statewide, and Casita continues to work alongside our partners to remove barriers to infill middle housing in our neighborhoods through regulatory reform, education, and equity strategies. For today's webinar, we're pleased to welcome Nick Marantz from the University of California at Irvine and the NYU Furman Center. Nick will share highlights from a recent report he co-authored called Evaluating California's ADU Reforms, Preliminary Evidence and Lessons for State Governments. We'll then be joined by Michael McLaughlin, Housing Policy Specialist with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. Before I turn it over to Nick, we'd like to thank our major sponsors, Wells Fargo, the San Francisco Foundation, and CZI, as well as our webinar sponsors, the California Building Industry Association, AARP California, the Law Office of Alan Matkins, the Law Office of Ruben, Junius, and Rose, and the Building Industry Association of the Bay Area. And a special welcome to our new premier member, Samara. To save time, the bio information for our presenter will be in the chat. As a reminder, if attendees could use the Q&A feature for their questions, not the chat, that will be appreciated. Nick, thanks for joining us. Please go ahead and share your screen. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Ann, and thanks to the Casita Coalition for this invitation. Today, I'm going to be talking about research that I conducted with Chris Elmendorf of UC Davis and Yujin Kim, a PhD student here at UC Irvine. This was research that was sponsored by the Furman Center at NYU. I should note that I am actually not an affiliate of the Furman Center. The Furman Center was, however, a generous sponsor of this research. It was also sponsored by the Pew Charitable Trusts. And I'm also delighted that Michael McLaughlin from the California Department of Housing and Community Development is here today, because this research is very much about, in part, about the important work that the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, as I'll be calling it, is doing now in order to ensure that the state's ADU laws are implemented effectively. So today I'm going to be talking very briefly about ADU legislation in California. My sense is that the audience for today's talk has a pretty good handle on the laws that have been adopted in California. What I will be talking about, and what I think is the main contribution of this report, involves patterns of ADU permitting in the Bay Area and 5 Southern California counties: Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura, and the role of state oversight in promoting ADU production. I should note that some of the numbers that I'm going to be mentioning today are a little bit different than what is in the report, and that's the result of refinements to the statistical model that we've been using, that we made after the report was published. So the recent legislative innovations that I mentioned in the previous slide involve a variety of state laws adopted since 2016, intended to liberalize ADU permitting. So California has actually had ADU laws on the books since 1982, but until relatively recently, those laws were widely, and I think correctly, viewed as largely ineffective. But in 2016, the legislature started to adopt laws that significantly constrained local authority to condition ADUs on things like parking minimums or minimum lot size requirements, and effectively required local governments to amend their zoning ordinances in order to allow ADUs by right on the vast majority of single-family parcels in the state. And the available evidence suggests that these changes have spurred a large increase in ADU permitting. California didn't collect data on ADU permitting or ADU production statewide before 2018, but a study of 7 major California cities found more than a tenfold increase in ADU applications from 2015 to 2017. And our research illustrates that ADUs are now a really significant portion of newly permitted housing. And our research is only possible because in addition to adopting these ADU reforms, the state also has significantly strengthened reporting requirements for local governments. So now local governments are required in their annual progress reports to include data on permits. And we rely on that data for our analysis. And so I'm just going to first present some summary statistics. Oops, let me go to the next slide. So these summary statistics provide units. And so we're looking here we're looking in the first column at the population. We're looking in the second column at the number of ADUs, according to the permit data from HCD. And then in these other columns, we're looking at census building permits. So these are building permits for different types of, for units of different types of structures. And in general, ADUs are going to be captured in the 1 unit, or mostly in the 1 unit, but in some cases in the 2 unit columns. What's important to note is that, first of all, the Census Bureau does not separately record ADUs. And so we are able to get a rough estimate of the proportion of building permits issued during this time period that were ADUs. So we're looking here first at the 9-county Bay Area. And what we see is that overall in the Bay Area, 13% of newly permitted units were ADUs. That ranges from a low of 5% in Solano County to a high of 73% in Marin County. I would note that that high proportion in Marin County is really driven by the low number overall of building permits issued in Marin County. And you can see that in counties where there were relatively more permits issued, ADUs are ranging from something like 12% in Contra Costa to 38% in San Mateo in the Bay Area. In the Southern California area that we studied, and I apologize, there aren't headers on this table. On the left side, we see again the population, right? So almost 19 million people in these 5 counties. Then in this second column here, we see the ADU permits. And in this last column, we see ADU permits as a percentage of all housing. And so you can see in Los Angeles County, ADU permits were more than a third or about a third of all permitted units during this period, 2018 to 2021. In Orange County, 10%. So really significant, a very significant portion of new housing permitted, which I think is both a testament to the importance of ADUs and also a testament to perhaps to underproduction of other types of housing, such as multifamily housing. So where are the ADUs being permitted? Well, we just saw this in terms of county level patterns, but we are also able, using this data, because the data we are able to geocode the data. So we're able to associate almost every ADU permit with a parcel, and we're able to geocode those parcels. And so we're able to look at a variety of characteristics of the parcels and the census tracts where these ADUs are being permitted. And so first of all, we were interested in the distribution of jobs accessibility by parcels where ADUs are being permitted. And so the way that we measure jobs accessibility is we use a distance-weighted sum of jobs within 50 miles of a tract. So distance-weighted means that a job that is 1 mile away from you counts 100%, and a job that is 50 miles away from you, we're going to divide that number of jobs by 50. And so basically jobs that are farther away count less. Jobs that are closer count more. And what we see is that that the jobs accessibility of ADUs in the Bay Area very closely mirrors the overall distribution of jobs accessibility. So the solid lines in these charts represent the distribution of houses with no ADU or parcels with no ADU, and the dashed lines are the distributions of parcels with ADUs. And so in the Bay Area, you can see that the distributions are pretty much the same. We have, at the bottom end, we see that there are ADUs are less well represented, which is good, right? That's what we want. We would like for ADUs to be going in more jobs accessible areas, and in the Bay Area, again, that is what we see, but the pattern mirrors the pattern of overall housing development, because the Bay Area is much more monocentric than Southern California, which is to say that jobs are much more concentrated, more centrally concentrated in the Bay Area than in Southern California, where jobs are extremely dispersed. And what I think is interesting about the Southern California pattern is, first of all, you see this big hump at the bottom of the distribution for parcels with no ADUs, and you see that there are not really ADUs going on these less jobs accessible parcels in Southern California. And so what this suggests is that ADUs are going on relatively jobs accessible parcels, which is, as I said, I think somewhat heartening from the perspective of putting housing where it's most needed in terms of jobs accessibility. Another interesting finding is we're able to look at median gross rents in the census tracts where ADUs are being permitted. And what we see here is that ADUs are being permitted in tracts with relatively low rents, not the very lowest rents, but tracts with relatively low rents. And so you can see that because the dotted lines here are generally somewhat to the left of the bulk of the solid lines, particularly in Southern California. And this multivariate statistical analysis, so this is where we control for a bunch of parcel level, tract level, and even city level characteristics, bears this out. And it also indicates, so it suggests that ADUs are being permitted in tracts that are census tracts that have relatively low rents, but not the very lowest rents in the state. Another feature of our multivariate statistical analysis, as I mentioned, is that it enables us to look at city-level characteristics. Interestingly, the city-level characteristic that we found to have the strongest relationship is the density of homeowners associations. And so a higher density of homeowners associations is associated with a lower probability that a parcel will receive an ADU after controlling for a variety of other potentially explanatory factors. It's also, I think, important to look at the correlations between the proportions of residents in ethno-racial categories and the proportions of single-family parcels with ADU permits. So we take all of the census tracts in each county that we examined, and we look at the correlations between ethno-racial characteristics of a tract and demographic characteristics of a tract and ADU permitting. And what we find is that it varies a lot. So here I'm only showing statistically significant results. And what you see is that, for example, the proportion of residents identifying as Asian or Asian American is associated with lower ADU permitting in LA County and Riverside County and Ventura County, but a much higher proportion of ADU permitting in Orange County. The proportion of residents identifying as Black or African American is associated with negative permitting rates in Riverside and San Bernardino County, and not statistically significant rates in LA County, Orange County, or Ventura County. In all 5 Southern California counties, the proportion of residents identifying as Hispanic or Latino is positively and statistically significantly correlated with ADU permitting, and the proportion of residents identifying as white is negatively correlated with ADU permitting. The results are only statistically significant in 3 counties, and the results are negative for all 3 counties in Southern California. In the Bay Area, we see that where the proportion of residents identifying as Asian is statistically significant, it's negatively associated with ADU permitting. Where the proportion of residents identifying as Black or African American is statistically significant, it's associated with with more ADU permitting. In general, the proportion of residents identifying as Hispanic or Latino is not statistically significant in the Bay Area counties, where it is in Solano County, which, as I mentioned before, has a very low overall rate of ADU permitting. It's positively associated with ADU outcomes. And then you see these sort of, in general, the proportion of residents identifying as white is not statistically significant. And we also see these sort of heterogeneous outcomes. All right. So this first part of the research just provides some sort of summaries, I think informative summaries about the state of ADU permitting, where are units being permitted. The second part of the project is focused on evaluating local performance. So as I mentioned before, the state has adopted these reforms that require local governments to amend their zoning ordinances to authorize ADUs, but the state then has to oversee these local implementation processes. And despite the recent changes in state law, a 2020 survey of ADU owners indicated that securing municipal approval was the main impediment to building an ADU. Some of the surveyed homeowners claimed that their local governments had failed to comply with the requirements of the new state ADU laws. The state legislature has attempted to address these remaining hurdles by requiring local governments to submit their ADU ordinances to the state's Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. And then based on its review, HCD provides guidance to local governments by suggesting amendments. If HCD finds that an ordinance does not comply with state law, and then the municipality fails to revise the ordinance to HCD's satisfaction, the agency may refer the locality to the state's attorney general for enforcement. So there are levels of enforcement. And of course, HCD can also provide technical assistance if it turns out to be the case that a local government is trying to improve its, or to comply with state requirements, but unable to do so. So I should mention that in a previous conversation with Michael McLaughlin, who's here today, I learned that HCD has now more resources to devote to review of local ordinances. It's in past years, it has reviewed relatively few of these local ordinances. So between October 2018 and October 2022, HCD reviewed ordinances for 35 jurisdictions, 33 municipalities, 2 counties. There are 482 municipalities and 58 counties in California. And so at its prior average rate of 8.75 ordinances per year, HCD would finish reviewing all city and county ordinances sometime around 2080. So clearly, HCD needs some way to prioritize which ordinances to review most closely. And in the second part of the research project, this is what we attempted to provide. So we thought that HCD could prioritize its review by assessing the probability that a parcel would receive an ADU permit as a function of parcel and tract characteristics, and also an indicator variable denoting the jurisdiction in which the parcel is located. And so I'll leave the details of this to the Q&A, since I want to be mindful of time. But we thought this was a way to potentially help guide evaluation of local ordinances. And so again, we're looking at the 9-county Bay Area and 5 Southern California counties, and we're using a regression model to assess the probability that a single family parcel received an ADU permit from 2018 through 2021. And we're controlling for characteristics other than local policy that might explain why a parcel would or wouldn't get an ADU permit. So these are things like lot size, steep slope, the number of structures on the parcel, and we're also controlling for tract characteristics, median gross rent, and the proportion of vacant land area. And so what we get are these fixed effects, what are called fixed effects estimates for municipalities. And so if all jurisdictions, and I'm aware that you can't read the print on this, but I'm going to provide as a close-up in a minute. So if all and we're looking here at cities in LA County, if all of these cities were equally likely to permit ADUs after controlling for parcel and tract level characteristics, then we would expect that 0, indicated here by the vertical line, we would expect that 0 would be within the confidence interval for 95% of all jurisdictions. So the fact that 0 is within the 95% confidence interval for only 29% of the jurisdictions in LA County and 32% of the jurisdictions in our full sample suggests that additional city level factors are continuing to affect ADU production. So now I want to zoom in to these jurisdictions that have fixed effects below 0, because those are the ones that we think maybe should be priorities for review. Only 2 of these jurisdictions, West Covina and Palmdale, have been reviewed by HCD as of October 2022. And it is notable that of these unreviewed jurisdictions, 16 are in the top quartile of jobs accessibility among cities statewide, and 11 are in the top decile. It's also notable, I think, that the demographics of these unreviewed jobs accessible jurisdictions vary quite significantly. So for example, median household income in Cudahy is $47,050, whereas it's $181,591 in La Habra Heights, and home ownership rates in these 2 cities are respectively 14% and 92%. And so a city with relatively few resources, such as Cudahy, where renters predominate, may face different challenges in accommodating ADUs as compared with a high resource city such as La Habra Heights. So we're not suggesting that this model should necessarily be used for enforcement, but rather it can be used to target technical assistance where needed and enforcement where needed. In sum, we see on average that tract level gross rents are negatively related to ADU permitting. This average negative relationships masks non-linearities. That is to say that we're seeing less ADU permitting in the very lowest rent tracts. But if we divide rents into quintiles, we see that in the second quintile is where we see a lot of ADU permitting, and then dropping off in the top 3 quintiles. We think that requirements for local governments to liberalize ADU permitting should be accompanied by data collection and enforcement provisions, as has been the case in California, because with good data, it's possible to create quantitative measures to set priorities for state agencies' review of ADU ordinances. State agencies can develop relatively simple quantitative models to prioritize their review of local laws, And by prioritizing their review of local ordinances, these agencies can target technical assistance where it's most needed, and if necessary, focus enforcement actions where they may be most effective. So with that, I will conclude my presentation, and I look forward to the discussion.
Nick, thank you very much for that. Fascinating data in the report about proximity to jobs and median gross rents and shifting construction to different income quintiles. So really appreciate the work here. And so with that, we are joined by Michael McLaughlin, housing policy specialist on the ADU enforcement team at HCD, as well as Jared Bassler, Casita Coalition's Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives. Welcome to you both. I think we want to get right into kind of a crux of the question that goes right to Michael here. How did the HCD team respond to the suggestions in the report on how the department might consider prioritizing which jurisdictions, to review for compliance? I think probably anyone who hears the report is struck by this notion that without some changes, it would take until 2080 to get there. So help us understand how we might change that.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to just go into a little bit of history first. Of the ADU team. It was really formed in like 2020 by one retired person now, and then Greg Nicholas, who kind of just got these new laws dumped on them. It's like, enforce this, and so they really started hiring a team last year, and I basically replaced Greg as the only specialist on the ADU team, but we have lots of analysts, and we have reviewed 33 ordinances this year thus far, and are on track to review like at least another 20 more. That's in addition to several other letters. I'm actually personally the subject matter expert on now engaging and building cases against HOAs, because we recognize even before reading Professor Marantz's report that HOAs were unreasonably restricting, or just honestly just ignorant of new laws.
That's great to hear that you're starting to move in that direction too, as we see that was a clear problem as well.
For sure. We also offer, we've also, developed a new system that has had its own growing pains, but it's a portal. I'm going to put the link in the chat here in a second. But we've reviewed, I think, 2,200 cases since it launched last year, and so that is a pretty big average of complaints that we are fielding. And that's all going to matter a lot, we hope, in the future, if the governor signs AB 434, which would allow HCD to have not just enforcement authority over ordinances, but over non-compliant actions, again, that are contrary to state law as well. So we've been also busy. I can't go too far into what exactly the cases, but we have been busy building cases around certain themes that have been particularly thorny, like front setbacks and delay times at jurisdictions. I want to say, like, sorry, just to go back to the actual question, what was our response to the report? I mean, I joined the team in part because I knew we could be doing a lot more, and I wanted to do a lot more. I came from the world of ADU and tiny home advocacy in LA long before, and so to be part of the enforcement team and also have a data background myself, I ran into the report. I didn't know it existed. It was out for like 3 months, but I ran into Professor Marantz at a UCLA event, which is why it's so important for us to also meet in person and convene. And I'm happy to say that HCD has actually launched a special project based off of the data from the report. And so again, that's all deliberative, but we are essentially looking at jurisdictions identified as low performers from UCI. We are, we're really excited about lots of different text-driven solutions we're also putting together, and this is deliberative, so this part is definitely subject to management approval, but we are collaborating with our data and innovation team to create ADU power rankings. So any of you familiar with power rankings, we want to use different tools to motivate jurisdictions and also support them. So we are we are considering the development of ADU templates or ADU pre-approved plans for jurisdictions who are going to kick and squeal about AB 1234. I can't remember anymore. There's too many.
1332 by Carrillo.
1332. Thank you. Yes. I should know. I covered all of these with the legislature, but anyhow.
I understand your challenge. Tell us about power rankings for someone who doesn't know what that means.
We're starting a fantasy ADU league, and so this is going to be key. No, go ahead, Mike.
Please don't go there, Jared. Go somewhere else, Michael. Please help me here.
We're trying to rank jurisdictions maybe similarly in some ways, but essentially motivated by taking a data-driven approach to rank jurisdictions of different quintiles of size on their ADU output in different, perhaps like different fields, like how are you doing in terms of building affordable ADUs and things like that, like using certain metrics.
Well, right, because that's something that didn't come into the Furman report is the actual affordability metric. And yeah, I think some of our assumptions are a bit wishful possibly on that. So that would be helpful to keep track of that a little better. Right?
Well, and I think that comes down to like data integrity and how we can make sure that we're getting the best data that is reliable out of these jurisdictions. One thing that I've seen across the last 5-6 years in the space is that every jurisdiction internally has different ways that they keep track of the numbers of permits, and even looking at in the research that you presented, someone like Marin having more ADUs than 1 and 2 unit permits from the census data. Obviously you're pulling those from different places, but it really demonstrates the kind of the difference in data collection and data integrity across the board. And so I'm wondering if there's anything either the HCD is looking at or that you saw in the research, Nick, that suggests that maybe a path forward on better data integrity across the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, yes. So a big part of the research, a big part of the work that went into the research was sort of cleaning the annual progress report data from HCD, and I've talked to folks at HCD about. I think HCD has taken. First of all, I just want to commend HCD for being engaged and open to dialogue about a whole variety of issues. It's always a pleasure to talk with folks at ATU, and I've been very impressed by many of the interactions that I've had, including with Michael. I would, yeah. So I think there is more. I think that HCD could do on the data validation side when jurisdictions submit their annual progress reports. We were able to pretty reliably match a very high percentage, over 95% of the APR ADU reported ADU permits to parcels. Now, whether ADUs were ultimately built or whether those permits were real, we can't tell. But we can tell that the municipalities reported ADU permits for those parcels. In terms of comparing to the census data, I mean, the Census Building Permit Survey is itself not by any stretch of the imagination perfect. And in particular, when it comes to ADUs, if you actually read the survey, the instructions for reporting which ADUs to count on the building permit survey are pretty confusing. And so that itself may account for some of the variation. But I think, in Marin, it's an overall low number of permits. And when you have these small samples, the noise to signal ratio goes up. And so I think that sort of helps to explain what we're seeing in Marin County. But I would love to hear more from Michael about what what HCD is doing in terms of improving data collection. And I would just emphasize that California, I've talked to folks in other states, and California is miles ahead of, I think, any other state in terms of its data collection practices.
I think I'm going to pull us away from that question. I think we can probably agree that data collection is important and an ongoing challenge, something probably everyone hopes to do better on, because we do have a number of questions from the audience here that I think will be of general interest while we have just a couple minutes left here. And so we do have a question from Jennifer about new data, whether we're going to see more information from Sacramento, for example. I'm not sure if that was specifically about Sacramento City or what may be shared. Anything there? I know your data, Nick, looked at just a limited number.
Yeah, so we were somewhat constrained by where we had not only ADU data, which is statewide, but zoning data, which is not statewide. So we needed to be able to identify where which parcels were zoned for single family development, and we were not able to get that for Sacramento. For the Sacramento region in time to do this report. I anticipate that there will be, that more consistent zoning data will become available more broadly. I think there may already be such data available for Sacramento, and we can definitely think about extending the analysis. And in terms of the ADU data, it's already available for.
Great. I think that goes back to our previous kind of challenge on consistent usable data. And for anyone, you should be able to see it in the chat, but anyone not seeing it, I do want to call your attention to the chat where we have links to HCD's portal, and dashboard. It does have a lot of information. So anyone who hasn't made use of that portal and gone through it, I'd highly recommend it, that there is a lot of information there that can be gleaned. And a couple more questions while we have Michael here with a few more minutes. What's the new timing for the ADU state code chaptering reorg? Any update on that for us? I think that'll be of general interest to people.
So SB 477 was introduced to the legislature, and they decided to essentially stop it in committee. I'm not the soothsayer of the legislature, so I really can't tell you what they're going to do next year. But I bet that I actually bet like Jared could probably tell you that more than I would.
Yeah. So for those of you that are wondering what we're talking about, the chaptering is really about code reorganization for a number of different housing related codes. Basically, all of us who know government code 65852.2 will have to know a different government code now because the numbering system is changing. So essentially it was originally intended to be passed along this year in effect in January, which then I think actually complicates things quite a bit with some of the other stuff that's going on, because it would have required at the same time all of the code numbers to be changed while new code is going in. So one of the things that's, as Mike said, is they pulled it back here at the end of the session to put it back forward at the very beginning of next session for a priority bill that would take effect probably mid next year. So it actually gives Mike and the team a little bit more time to get everything updated in the meantime, and then that would allow for the renumbering of things early.
That'll be helpful for the policy wonks amongst us then who are interested in those types of organizational issues. Along with that, and maybe also of general interest while we have Michael here, any update on ETA for the next edition of the HCD's ADU handbook? That's something I know a lot of us rely on, and
it is under it's under legal review, and that's something we've also requested from the legislature's additional attorney firepower, because right now it's great that we have now 7, I think it's a team of now 7, 8 people. That used to be 1 2 years ago, but our legal, we still only have like 1 attorney, so advocate for more legal enforcement for HCD.
Some limits there. Well, Jared, Michael, Nick, thank you for joining us this morning. We're so pleased to have you and interested in the ongoing work and research you're doing. It's all the time we have now for questions, but our thanks to also our support team and our sponsors. And on behalf of the Casita Coalition, our thanks to everyone who's attending with us today. We invite other ADU and middle housing professionals, community-based organizations, and homeowners to add your voice and join the conversation by becoming a member and donating to the Casita Coalition at casitacoalition.org. You'll find lots of resources on our website, including guidebooks on subjects like legalizing unpermitted ADUs, ADU finance, and multifamily ADUs, links to our webinar library on our YouTube channel, and many more resources for both ADU professionals and homeowners. And for those who have asked about recording this webinar, it'll be there. You can keep up to date on all of our events and stay informed with ADU and middle housing news by joining our mailing list or becoming a member. Again, casitacoalition.org. And before we go, it's my pleasure to introduce Celeste Goye, Executive Director of Casita Coalition, and she's going to speak a little about an upcoming opportunity to get together, as Michael mentioned, an important opportunity to kind of talk and move forward small and missing middle housing. Celeste.
Hi, and thanks to everyone today for joining this conversation. It could have gone on, I think, for another hour. It's such a fascinating field and so big and so deep. Thank you both. Yes, we're having a convening in November. It's called Build the Middle, a national housing convening, and it's an invitational policy gathering. There's information on our website you'll see it in the navigation if you go to casitacoalition.org or go directly to casitacoalition.org, announcing Build the Middle. And there's an interest form there. You can indicate your interest in attending, and we'll get back to you with the registration link. There's information about the speakers. We've got quite an array of speakers and sessions that will be of interest to policy folks, to everyone involved in removing the barriers to building more ADUs and middle housing in California. And we'll have folks from around North America, from Canada, and from all over the country. So it should be a really terrific conversation that we hope you'll join us for. Back to you, Anne.
Yep. Thanks, Celeste. We'll really look forward to continuing, the very brief conversation we've had here and so many other threads, at that event. So hoping many of you here can join us there in November. With that, we thank you again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.